You can love someone with every fiber of your being and still push them away without realizing it. Sometimes it's not the person who's wrong for us. Sometimes it's the fear inside us. The fear of being abandoned. The fear of not being enough. The fear that this happiness, this connection is too good to last. If you've ever found yourself overthinking every text, questioning their tone, panicking when they take too long to respond, or needing constant reassurance, this isn't just about insecurity. This is about anxiety, and it's quietly sabotaging your relationship. Today, I want to talk about the subtle but powerful ways anxiety can erode love, and how you can take back control, not just of your relationship, but of your peace. When anxiety starts to creep into a relationship, it often disguises itself in a way that looks deceptively like care. It wraps itself in good intentions, in the idea that you're just being thoughtful, attentive, loving. But underneath that impulse to check in again, to double text, to ask if everything is okay, for the 5th time today, there's something else going on. It's not always about love. Sometimes it's about fear. It's about this gnawing discomfort with uncertainty. It's the ache that says, if I don't do something, I'll lose them, even when there's no real danger of that happening. Anxiety doesn't like stillness. It doesn't like unknowns. It wants to fill the silence, to close the gap between what we feel and what we think the other person might be feeling. So we reach out again. We try to smooth over every small moment of tension, even when it hasn't had time to breathe. We say we're being present, but what we're really doing is trying to control the situation. We're trying to manage the emotional climate so that we never have to feel unsafe. And what's terrifying is that sometimes we mistake this for emotional attentiveness. We think, I'm just showing up for them. I'm just making sure we're okay. But relationships don't thrive under surveillance. They thrive under trust. They thrive under space. They thrive when two people can breathe and be individuals, not constantly manage each other's comfort. What you have to ask yourself in those moments is this: am I checking in because something real is off? Or am I trying to soothe something inside myself by controlling what's outside me? Because there's a massive difference between reaching out from love and reaching out from fear. One builds connection, the other builds pressure. And pressure, even when it's subtle, pushes people away. When someone starts to feel like your presence is more about managing your anxiety than genuinely sharing your life with them, they begin to emotionally retreat. Not because they don't care, but because it's exhausting to feel responsible for someone else's emotional stability all the time. And here's what makes it even more painful. Most of the time, the person who's anxious knows they're doing it. They know they're reaching out too much. They know they're reading too far into a silence or a shorter reply. But the discomfort of doing nothing is unbearable. The unknown feels like a threat, so they act again and again and again. Not because they're needy or manipulative or dramatic, but because their fear feels real. Their fear says, you have to do something right now or this will all fall apart. And so they chase a kind of emotional insurance, some text, some sign, some validation that says, you're still safe, you're still wanted, you're still loved. And this leads right into one of the most common traps of anxious relationships, the craving for reassurance. It starts innocently enough. A quick, are we okay? A soft, do you still love me? A need to hear it one more time just to feel grounded. But it rarely stops there, because reassurance doesn't stay. It doesn't stick. It calms the storm for a moment, but then the silence comes again. The uncertainty creeps back in, and you're back to needing another fix. It's like trying to fill a cup with a hole in the bottom. No matter how much love someone pours in, it never feels like enough when there's a part of you that fundamentally believes you're not worthy without constant confirmation. This isn't just hard on you, it's hard on the relationship. Because no one wants to feel like they're constantly being tested. No one wants to be in a love that feels like an exam they have to pass every day just to keep your belief in them alive. Eventually, they feel like nothing they say is enough. No matter how many times they reassure you, no matter how consistent or present or kind they are, it still doesn't land. And that's not because they're doing something wrong. It's because anxiety keeps moving the finish line. What was enough yesterday isn't enough today. And that cycle, over time, becomes exhausting. Not just for you, but for the person trying to love you. There's something incredibly powerful in recognizing that your need for reassurance isn't wrong, but it is misplaced. It's not your partner's job to hold your worth together every day. It's not their job to rescue you from the doubts that were born long before they ever showed up. That part, that healing, that belongs to you. And here's the irony. When you stop needing someone to reassure you constantly, you actually make space for real reassurance to happen. The kind that comes naturally, not out of pressure. The kind that feels like a gift, not an obligation. Because true security in a relationship doesn't come from someone repeating how much they love you 10 times a week. It comes from trusting that their love exists even in the silence. Even in the mundane. Even when they're tired or distracted or not being poetic about how they feel. Real love isn't loud all the time. Sometimes it's quiet. And when you can sit in that quiet without panicking, without chasing, without doubting, you begin to realize just how strong you really are. And how much more peaceful love feels when it doesn't have to prove itself constantly just to make you believe it's real. Anxiety has a way of robbing us of the moment we're in. You can be on a beautiful date. There's laughter, closeness, maybe even a sense of ease you haven't felt in a long time. And still, somewhere in the back of your mind, there's this whisper. This won't last. It doesn't matter how good it feels right now. It doesn't matter that nothing's wrong. Anxiety isn't interested in what's real. It's interested in what could go wrong. It projects fear into a future that hasn't even happened yet, and convinces you to start preparing for a disaster that's purely imagined. You start asking questions in your head like, what if they leave me? What if they stop loving me? What if they're only pretending to care? And without realizing it, you're no longer present in the very moment you were supposed to be enjoying. You're in a hypothetical world, rehearsing pain that doesn't even exist. This kind of fearful forecasting is exhausting, because it traps you in a constant state of emotional alert. You're not responding to your partner, you're responding to your own fears about what might be. And the tragedy of that is you miss the beauty of the connection in front of you. You're so busy guarding your heart against an ending that hasn't even begun to happen that you stop allowing it to truly open. The joy you should feel gets diluted by dread. The peace you deserve is interrupted by mental alarms going off for things that aren't real. And when that happens over and over, it starts to change how you show up in the relationship. You become suspicious of kindness, you brace for disappointment after every moment of closeness, and worst of all, you start to doubt your own ability to relax and enjoy love when it's being offered. What makes this even more complicated is that many people think this kind of behavior means they're just being careful. They tell themselves, I'm just being realistic. I've been hurt before. I'm not going to get blindsided again. But here's the thing, being cautious is one thing. Being constantly prepared for emotional disaster is another. When you're always looking for the moment someone will disappoint you, leave you, betray you, you're not protecting yourself, you're isolating yourself. You're creating distance, not safety. You're living in a state of emotional exile where you never really let anyone in, because your mind is always preparing for them to go. And that's where it starts to bleed into another pattern that anxiety loves to create. Hyperindependence. On the surface, it looks like strength. You tell yourself, I don't need anyone. I've got this. I'm fine on my own. You might even wear it like a badge of honor. But what most people don't realize is that hyperindependence is often born out of deep emotional fear. It's the protective strategy you built when needing someone felt too dangerous. When you opened up before and it ended in disappointment or abandonment, your nervous system learned. Don't do that again. Keep it together. Don't rely. Don't need. Don't feel. So now, even when someone wants to be there for you, you don't let them. You don't ask for help. You downplay your struggles. You act like everything's fine, even when you're falling apart inside. And let's be honest. There's something seductive about not needing anyone. It gives you the illusion of control. You tell yourself, if I don't depend on anyone, then no one can hurt me. If I never need, then I never lose. But here's the catch, you also never connect. Because intimacy requires vulnerability. It requires leaning on someone else sometimes. It means letting yourself be seen, not just in your strength, but in your mess, in your fears, in the parts you're afraid make you unlovable. And when you build walls so high that no one can see those parts, you're not protecting yourself. You're starving yourself of the very thing you crave most, emotional closeness. People often confuse emotional walls with boundaries. But boundaries are about clarity and self-respect. Walls are about fear. Boundaries say, I know what I need and I'll communicate it. Walls say, I won't show you who I really am because you might not love me if I do. And here's the truth that hurts before it heals. Love can't reach you if you're hiding. The people who care about you want to support you. They want to know your fears, your needs, your dreams. They don't want perfection, they want presence. But you can't be fully present in love if you're constantly trying to protect yourself from it. You can't receive deep, lasting intimacy if you're always one emotional step away from being honest. Hyperindependence might have been the armor that got you through the past, but it's not what's going to carry you into a healthy, fulfilling relationship. What will is learning to trust that not everyone will hurt you the way someone else did. It's understanding that while vulnerability does carry risk, it also carries the reward of connection. And it's believing, truly believing, that being seen in your humanity doesn't make you weak. It makes you real. It makes you reachable. And ultimately, it makes you lovable in a way that no facade of strength ever could. One of the cruelest tricks anxiety plays on us is convincing us to act in ways that push away the very thing we're most desperate to hold on to. You're scared they'll leave, so you become overly attentive. You're terrified they'll cheat, so you get suspicious of every small detail. You fear they're drifting, so you try to pull them closer over and over again. And all the while, you're acting from a place of panic, not love. You tell yourself, I'm just fighting for this. But what you're really doing is feeding a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more you grip tightly, the more they feel suffocated. The more you second-guess their words, the more they feel misunderstood. The more you interrogate the silence, the less safe they feel in it. And eventually, they begin to retreat. Not because they don't care, but because the weight of your fear has started to feel heavier than the love itself. What makes this so painful is that the person who's anxious often has a huge heart. They love deeply, fully, intensely. But that depth of love, when unguarded by inner security, can turn into fear-fueled behavior. So instead of expressing love with calm and confidence, they express it with urgency, with neediness, with an underlying message of please don't go. And that's when the spiral begins. They start seeing the partner pulling away slightly, which might just be a moment of tiredness or distraction, and interpret it as a warning sign. So they react. A text, a call, a question, a confrontation. The partner, now feeling emotionally cornered, withdraws a little more. The anxious partner feels that distance and ramps up the reaction. And so the cycle spins faster and faster, until it feels like they're chasing someone who once stood willingly by their side. This is how anxiety turns love into a test. Every missed call, every neutral tone, every moment of pause gets analyzed, dissected, and reinterpreted as evidence of something going wrong. And the more time you spend inside that story, the less room you give your relationship to breathe. You're no longer engaging with your partner, You're engaging with your fear. You're having an argument with a version of them that only exists in your mind. And eventually, that version becomes more familiar to you than the real one. You stop seeing who they actually are and start seeing who you fear they're becoming. Here's the truth most people don't realize until it's too late. Being afraid someone will leave can actually make them feel like they're never truly welcome to stay. When someone constantly feels like they have to prove they're not going anywhere, they stop feeling chosen and start feeling responsible. And that kind of pressure doesn't nurture love. It crushes it. No one wants to feel like they're walking through a minefield of someone else's insecurities every day, where any misstep might trigger doubt or fear or an emotional meltdown. Love needs space. It needs trust. It needs room to exist without being suffocated by endless questioning. And so, anxiety doesn't just cause emotional pain. It also causes relational fatigue, because over time, both people start to feel like they're walking on eggshells. The anxious partner is constantly bracing for abandonment. The other partner is constantly trying not to trigger that fear. It becomes a dance of avoidance, rather than a dance of connection. And slowly, the joy begins to fade. The lightness that once brought you together gets replaced by heaviness. And worst of all, both of you start to wonder, why does this feel so hard now? But that's just one side of the coin, because on the other side, there's the internal chaos that no one sees. The storm that brews inside when anxiety starts dissecting every word, every glance, every delay in a reply. You know it's irrational. You tell yourself not to overthink. You say it's probably nothing. Don't jump to conclusions. But then they take a little longer to text back. Or they sound different on the phone. Or they don't say, I love you in the usual way. And suddenly your brain is on fire. You replay the last conversation. You go back and reread old messages. You look for patterns, for clues, for hidden meanings. You ask yourself 100 questions, none of which have satisfying answers. And that emotional noise becomes deafening. It's not just that you're afraid of being hurt. It's that your brain is trying to predict pain before it arrives, so that maybe this time you'll be ready for it. But the truth is, no amount of mental rehearsal ever truly softens the blow of heartbreak. What it does do is rob you of peace while the relationship is still alive. It steals joy from your moments of connection. It makes you suspicious when there's no reason to be. It makes you tense when you should be relaxed. And worst of all, it makes you start distrusting yourself. Because now, every time you feel afraid, you don't know whether to trust your intuition or your anxiety. You start second-guessing your instincts, your partner, your worth. All of it becomes blurred. The irony is that the more you try to decode every message, the more disconnected you actually become. Because instead of simply asking your partner what's going on, you create an entire narrative in your head. You assume, you project, you react. And sometimes, that reaction causes more damage than whatever minor issue may have existed in the first place. Relationships can survive misunderstandings, but they struggle to survive constant interrogation. They need space to be imperfect, to ebb and flow, to breathe. But anxiety doesn't leave room for that. It demands constant certainty. And love doesn't work that way. The truth is, you don't need to be a mind reader. You don't need to interpret every silence. You need to ask. You need to trust. And most importantly, you need to create a life where your peace isn't held hostage by someone else's every word or tone. When you stop chasing certainty from your partner and start building it within yourself, you'll notice something incredible. The relationship begins to feel lighter. Not because your partner changed, but because you did. One of the most persistent and painful stories anxiety tells us is that we're either too much or not enough. It's this quiet, underlying belief that who we are, when fully seen, is somehow unlovable. And so we begin to edit ourselves. We soften the truth of how we feel. We shrink our emotions to fit what we think someone else can handle. We tiptoe around our needs. We apologize for expressing anything that might seem like an inconvenience. Not because we don't feel deeply, but because we're afraid those feelings will be used as evidence against us, that they'll be the reason someone pulls away. Anxiety convinces us that love is conditional, that if we show too much, we'll overwhelm, and if we show too little, we'll be forgotten. So you start to ask for less even when you need more. You wait for them to check in, even though you're longing to connect. You convince yourself to stay calm when they say something that hurts you, not because you aren't affected, but because you've learned that expressing pain might lead to disconnection. That somehow your feelings are too big, too messy, too inconvenient. And this becomes the emotional tightrope you walk every day, constantly adjusting, constantly filtering, constantly wondering if you're doing too much or not enough to be loved in return. It's exhausting. It's lonely. And worst of all, it's not love. It's performance. The people who are most vulnerable to this mindset are often the ones with the biggest hearts. The ones who care so deeply that they would rather suppress their truth than risk rejection. But here's what's so important to understand. Any love that requires you to diminish yourself isn't love. It's accommodation. And when you get used to accommodating, you stop even noticing how much you're giving up just to keep someone around. You tell yourself that your standards are too high. You convince yourself that your emotional needs are unreasonable. You start to question your own reality. And that internal erosion, that slow, quiet self-betrayal becomes the real heartbreak. Not because someone else stopped loving you, but because somewhere along the way you stopped showing up for yourself. There's this dangerous belief we often carry that love is something we have to earn. That we have to perform well enough, be agreeable enough, be low maintenance enough to deserve someone staying. And that belief turns every relationship into an audition. Every text is a test. Every disagreement feels like a verdict. And so we bend and fold and twist ourselves into something we think is more palatable. We become the easy partner, the chill one, the one who doesn't ask for too much. But inside we're starving. Not for affection, not for attention, but for permission to be our full, unfiltered selves and still be loved. What makes this especially painful is that most people don't even realize they're doing it. They just know they're tired. They just know that love feels harder than it should. They know they're constantly walking on emotional eggshells, not because their partner demands it, but because their fear does. And fear doesn't just whisper, it shouts. Says, don't say that. Don't ask for that. Don't be a burden. Don't make them uncomfortable. And slowly, fear becomes the third person in your relationship. The one that keeps you small. The one that rewrites your words. The one that keeps you silent, even when your heart is screaming for connection. But there's a powerful shift that happens when you start turning that fear into awareness. When you begin to understand that your anxiety isn't trying to ruin your relationships, it's trying to protect you. It just doesn't know how to do it in a healthy way yet. And when you meet your anxiety with compassion instead of shame, you can begin to challenge it. You can start asking questions like, is this a fear or a fact? Am I seeing this clearly or through the lens of my past pain? You begin to catch the pattern in real time. You begin to notice when you're shrinking. And more importantly, you begin to choose differently. This is where the transformation begins. When you stop reacting and start responding. When you no longer let fear write the script. You learn to pause, to breathe, to notice the story you're telling yourself and ask if it's one you actually want to believe. And from that place of awareness, you start building something stronger than control. You build self-trust. Because control says, if I manage everything perfectly, I'll be safe. But self-trust says, even if things get hard, I can handle it. Even if someone leaves, I'll be okay. Even if I feel anxious, I can ground myself again. And that changes everything. It changes how you communicate. You stop needing constant reassurance. because you've learned how to soothe yourself. You stop analyzing every text because you're grounded in your own worth. You stop twisting yourself to fit someone else's expectations because you know you're lovable exactly as you are. Love stops being a battlefield of self-protection and starts becoming what it was always meant to be: a partnership. A space where you can show up fully without fear of being too much. A space where your needs are not a burden, but a bridge. Where your emotions are not a liability, but a language of connection. When you bring that version of yourself into a relationship, when you lead with grounded vulnerability instead of fear-based reaction, you create safety. Not just for yourself, but for the other person too. Because when you show up with openness, you give them permission to do the same. You invite real intimacy. You stop performing and start connecting. You stop chasing love and start being love. And that is the shift. That is the healing. That is when anxiety no longer runs your relationship, you do. So, if you felt like this message was speaking directly to your heart, it's because you're not alone. We all have moments when our fear hijacks our connection. But awareness is the first step toward healing. So take a deep breath. Ask yourself, what would love look like if I wasn't afraid? Let that be your guide. If this resonated with you, I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you seen anxiety show up in your relationships? How did you handle it? Let's create a space of healing and growth together. And if you found this valuable, please hit like, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more motivational relationship advice. And one more thing, comment below with topics you want me to talk about next. This isn't just a channel. It's a conversation. Let's keep it going. You're worthy of love. And love is still possible even with anxiety. Let's take that next step forward, together.